Talk to me nice, talk to me honestly. Look in my eyes, don't let it fall.
Hi, everyone, and welcome to the Condé Nast Workshop, The Power of the Pivot. My name is Maya McCullough, and I am our Diversity and Inclusion Manager. Condé Nast is a global media company that produces some of the world's leading print, digital, video, and social content from some of your favorite brands like Vogue, GQ, Allure, and many more you may know. I personally have the pleasure of working alongside these three powerful women that you will hear from today, and I truly can't do the full justice of telling you about them, so I will let them introduce themselves. Ladies, in 1 minute, yes, 1 minute, could you tell us where you're calling from and a little bit about your role? Asia, I'll hand it over to you.
Okay, great. Thank you, Maya. And thank you, Sisters in Sales, for having me today and all of my ladies. But my name is Asia James, and I'm the Director of Emerging Audiences, which is a new role that sits in the Commercial Revenue Division. I think I skipped over where I'm calling from. I'm calling from Brooklyn, New York. So if you hear some fun in the background, that's where I'm at. And my role at Condé Nast is pretty new to the organization, but we're really focused, and I'm responsible for driving engagement with new and emerging audiences and how we categorize that: Black, Latinx, API, intersectionalities with LGBTQ and the millennial and Gen Z. So anyone that we want to go deeper with these communities, I partner with, the likes of these lovely ladies across all of our brands to figure out the most authentic approach to drive our partners' needs. That's the short elevator pitch there, but I'll pass the mic to maybe Jessica.
Yes. Hi, everyone. I'm so happy to be here with you all today. I am Jessica Krull, and I'm the editor-in-chief of Allure, and I have had that role for all of 7 days, so please bear in mind that I'm new. But I actually have been in the beauty industry and at Condé for some time, and I'm calling from Newark, New Jersey. So if there are any New Jersey folks on the call, hello. Blow up your spot. I love New Jersey. And so I really, in my new role, am responsible for guiding our brand forward and across every iteration of that brand, whether it be our Allure Beauty Box, the Allure Store, our website, our amazing print magazine. We just launched our 25th Best of Beauty Awards. So I'm sure you see us in stores and Sephora and Ulta when you go shopping. That is all kind of something that I help bring to life. And I'm so excited to be taking the helm of this brand moving forward. To Sueni.
Thanks, Jess. So yes, hi everyone. I'm Sueni Driscoll. I am also on the Allure team, working with my fearless, brand new, but always amazing editor-in-chief, Jessica. And I'm our executive director of editorial initiatives, which in a similar capacity to Asia is kind of a new facet for a sort of legacy traditional media company like Condé Nast. I'm our key conduit and the sort of translator in between the editorial side and our business and revenue teams. So my job is really to look at the brand at a holistic level and really be a strong partner to Jessica in looking at how these big themes and missions of the brand can work and live in extensions like our Allure store that we opened in Soho this summer. We launched podcasts. We have a strong consumer business. We have a beauty box business. And so how do all of those things work together and embody the themes that we have out in the magazine and across the pages of print, digital, social, each month and year over year. So it's definitely a role that is also a sort of new and emerging area in media. And it's figuring out how the content that we build and the relationships and great stories and culture that we are part of, that we drive, that we participate in, can live in non-traditional sort of newer facets, newer mediums, and just for us to reach new audiences and really grow the perspectives of both ourselves, our team, and the people that we serve through our content. I am also calling from Brooklyn, New York, and Asia is probably a 15-minute walk from me if I'm moving briskly.
So that's the cue that we probably will all hear trains in the back of our backgrounds. But thank you, ladies. I really appreciate you all. So let's go ahead and dive right in. So as I mentioned, the workshop is about the power of the pivot, right? So how you manifest your career in an ever-changing media and consumer landscape. So I would love for you all to walk the audience through and describe your most notable pivot in your career thus far that has truly stuck along with you and your path. So Sueni, since you closed us out, if you want to kick us off, that would be great.
Sure. I think for me, if I think about it, there have been a series of pivots of different sizes so far in my career. I spent a number of years working at a fashion brand. I was at Rag & Bone for a few years, and that was the early part of my career. And I think that there are some themes that were consistent throughout. I think consistently, like, storytelling was something that you kind of can find in each leg of the journey so far. But I do think that, like, when I think about it, I think it's actually more of a more consistent and constant evolution is how it's looked so far. And I think some of it is reactive, some of it is me responding to shifts that I'm seeing in the industry that I'm in or from the positions that I'm at. And some of it is actually less reactive and is more like determined, intentional. And some of it is I took a very like hard step into editorial and content after years doing the fashion thing, working brand side, doing sort of content from a brand side. The step directly into Condé editorial, digital publications, things like that, was a determined, like, clear choice that I made. But I think in terms of pivots, it's evolved over time, and it's something that I've allowed to grow me as it grows me and change as it's needed to change.
Yeah, and I think that's so key to note, Sueni, because so often people think maybe it's only one pivot in your career, right? But it's a facet of them. So would love to hear, Asia, how you have, really, selected that one pivot that you feel like in your career, along your path has kind of like defined your journey, not just where you are now, but where you want to go.
Yeah, of course. And even the word that you just mentioned, Maya, of defining. I mean, I'm still growing and moving and shaking. And I'll say, I don't know if there was a defining pivot for me, but something very notable in my career thus far has been I've always wanted to be in media, always wanted to be in the advertising content space. But I actually started out in editorial. So I worked at the likes of Ebony and Jet, and I was always in, I would say, traditional Black focused media. And I love that space. So I was fortunate to be groomed by the best and the brightest of women who look exactly like me. And I strategically chose to make a pivot to go to a legacy brand, to expand and to learn and to figure out how to bring in all of the likes and I would say the challenges of being at a small pub that is for the people, by the people, to a space like Condé Nast. That was definitely my largest pivot that I've made in my career thus far. And I would say an even micro pivot, as Soy likes to tell me it sometimes, is switching from editorial and then going into a commercial revenue driven role to really focus on the consumer, because I feel as though we have amazing content creators in many different spaces, and especially Condé Nast, like we own content space, like just gonna say it. But when it comes commercially, there's so much work for us to do and dive in to really drive home and making sure we're making the content that key consumers like emerging audiences want to hear from. So that's a more recent pivot that I've made, and I definitely will share more of that in the rest of our talk. But there's many micro pivots, and they all ladder up into one big goal. And I'm just here to make sure we're seen and shown out. Jessica? Already laughing at me.
Oh, I mean, we laugh a lot together. So I'm actually with you. I think I actually have a lot of moments in my career that I noticed that I pivoted, but it was mostly like Sueni said, in reaction to feedback that I was getting about where our industry was going. And I think the one thing I always tell everyone I work with is the only thing that's guaranteed is that it's going to change. And that has been especially true in my kind of decades-long career in media. And I'll never forget, my first pivot was actually before I even got my first job. I was an intern at Self Magazine at Condé back when it was at 4 Times Square. And I was doing my first New York internship. And this is a girl from Georgia, so I was super excited. And I talked to my internship coordinator, and I was like, any advice you have for me? I'm going back to school. What should I do so that I can have a job when I graduate? She says, forget print. And I said, what? Like, I want to be a print magazine editor. And she's like, digital, go back to school and figure out how the internet works. And literally I went and I changed my major from reporting to multimedia journalism. And I went and I learned how to, I was hoisting a camera, I was coding websites. And granted, luckily I don't do any of that today, but that pivot was really important to my career. And funny enough, I pivoted back. So I did 8 years in digital media at places like Pop Sugar and Refinery, and self.com. And now I'm the editor-in-chief of Allure, which is a print magazine. So I think the point there is go for skills. You know, when you make these pivots, think about what skill am I going to gain that is going to be useful to me. You know, I remember the first opportunity I had to do TV. I was like, I don't ever want to be on TV. My grandma used to ask me, do you want to be on broadcast? I was like, no, being on TV sounds horrible. But when that opportunity came, I said yes. I made the pivot. And that has been helpful to me in my career moving forward. So I think just really think about what skills am I going to gain from this pivot? And don't think pivoting away from something means you won't ever pivot back, because there's always opportunities to go back to maybe the original dream in a small way.
I love that, Jess, in terms of just, you know, dreaming big and understanding like where the industry is. And so I do want to dive a little bit deeper into, you know, your pivots. And so, you know, listening to you all, everything you all said is a mix of what the industry challenging you to make the pivot. You either identified the pivot or you just took a step back and it was very like spirit led, right? So I would love, Asia, for you to just go a little bit deeper in how you really carved, you know, your own path while you navigated that pivot.
100%. And I would say to kick off, I always lead with two things, especially in a role that's focused on consumers. I am also a consumer. So as I'm navigating consumer, thinking about what I need, what do my circles, what do we need? What are we grasping? How am I showing up in the industry is the first piece of it. The second piece is definitely grounding myself in a certain set of values as to why I got here and am I still enjoying it here? I think when you marry what the landscape and you get lost in what everybody is, what's trending, who should be on the cover, like who's hot right now, who made mistakes, who's going viral, who's canceled, like all of these things get so cluttered when you're trying to keep up with the Joneses, for the lack of better words. I've always made sure that I sit down every quarter, and because I'm a sales girl, yes, every quarter, planning my personal Q4 right now, which is really important. You know, so I'm like, what are my values as I'm stepping into a new leg of my pivot, owning a team, creating a new incubator role inside of a legacy company? How do I want to show up, and how do I want my team to show up? How do I want to be a real ambassador for Condé Nast in this work? I think navigating your brand and understanding what that looks like in a large conglomerate is very important, even large or small. So I don't want to focus on the amount of people at the company, but the amount of value that you can bring to that space. There's always something that will outshine, and there's always something that'll be put on your table that you have to figure out how to pivot along with. But when you sink yourself down into those values and what the consumer landscape is and understand you are to that consumer, it will always drive you back to a North Star. So I'll say that's always been my following path to make sure I'm on the right path while I'm on the pivot, which is such a story, right?
Well, I just want to jump in and say I am all for the quarterly planning. Like I tend to do mine more on a yearly basis, just because, you know, I'm not as organized, I guess, as Sis Asia. But I think I like recently went on a retreat before I started this job. And literally, I'm just in my journal thinking about, you know, what do I want to get out of this? What is the point of this? What do I want to be able to say at the, you know, in 3 years into this journey? And I think realizing that sometimes the job you want doesn't exist yet. And so you really have of what you're reaching towards. Because, you know, you can pivot all day, but making those pivots, you have to kind of do a lot of thinking and soul searching to make sure that whatever pivot you're making is right for you. So I love the quarterly planning, but I also recommend, you know, vision board or journal or goal set at least once a year to make sure that the path that you're on is the right one for whatever you want your career to be.
Totally.
Yeah, I love that. And it's one of those things too, where it's like, you know, as Black women, we want to like, you know, have it all together. We want to have the plan, but, you know, being able to pivot is the beauty of like where our careers will continue to go. And so, Sueni, I would love to hear, you know, your experience, because, you know, you touched on two prevalent aspects of the industry changing and you being able to take a step back, whether that be looking at social, looking at where digital is going and identifying where you need it to go to not fit in the box, but to, you know, make your lane. So we'd love to hear more about that.
Yeah, I think when I think about it in my career so far, it's definitely, there have been times when I've been like carving out the path for me, one that I hope still has, you know, quite a ways left. But I definitely think that for me, there have been times when I've been a specialist on my team and times that I've operated more as a generalist. And I think that's definitely shaped a lot of how I've grown and learned. I think to Asia's point about like a North Star moment for me, it's definitely always been a priority of mine on every team that I'm on to make sure that I'm like leaning into and learning from the people who are smarter than me, the people who are more experienced, the people who are sharper. I know like like in this industry, just like when we talk about careers, we talk about mentors a lot. And I think I've definitely benefited from peer mentors, people on different teams who are maybe at the same level as I am or have the same amount of experience, but are like immersed in a function entirely different from mine that can give me a perspective that helps inform my own. If I'm at a time or in a role and the value that I'm bringing to that team is in more of a generalist capacity, I definitely think in the role that I'm in now, which is again a new one for an editorial team and definitely a new one for Allure for Condé Nast, it's definitely I'm drawing a ton on the relationships I have across the building. I came into Condé on the revenue side, on the business side, and was there for 3 years before making this shift to editorial. And so like working, to Asia's point, being a sales girl means that you have been out there talking and building relationships and pitching with people for a few years. And that's like a key part to like that sort of peer mentorship and sort of like peer support that definitely has helped me carve out where I want to be or what spot I want to sort of be in. And so like seeing how someone on sales, or when I was on revenue, Jessica on edit, or our consumer team or our experiences events team, having a person in each department and knowing someone who's smart and forward thinking and is willing to sort of pour into me and give me some insight into what their specialty is, definitely like has refined me for every leg of the journey so far, I'd say.
Yeah, and I love the piece about the cross-functional learning, right? And like you and Asia, both, you took the time to learn different sectors of the business. So, and Jess, you took the more clear trajectory path in terms of, editorial, right? And so, you just stepped into your new role as editor-in-chief of Allure, and, knowing you, and in our prep call too, you just mentioned that it seems very linear, right? But, the role of an EIC is completely different, like you mentioned, now in 2021. So you're stepping into the limelight as a Black woman in this industry that is ever changing. What does your current pivot look like as you're pivoting a dream that you thought about like when you were younger?
Yeah, honestly, I think that being EIC, I often used to think that it was like when I was growing up, the end of your career. My little 17-year-old self was like, one day I'll be EIC and then I'll die. Because you don't really think a lot about, your career in that way when you're young. You're like, oh, that's the end. But I think something I've learned from all the other editors-in-chief that I've talked to, and when Sueni talked about mentors, I definitely have a group of people that I call when I'm like, what am I doing? What is this? What does this mean? I think thinking about EIC as a step to whatever I want to do next, and still going back to that skills thing. You're right. Being EIC requires business acumen. It requires social acumen, which I'm working on, y'all. I'm working on being more active on, I'm trying to be an influencer. It's hard, but, and then also obviously the important editorial skills that every journalist needs. And so I think it's changed so much over the years, but those skills are going to help me for whatever I want to do next. And I honestly didn't think I'd become editor-in-chief, because of the way that the industry was going. But you have to walk through the door when the door opens for you. And I don't know everything. And I'm so excited to know what I'm going to learn next. And I just wanted to say that when Sueni said that thing about peer mentors, these are my peer mentors. These are the women that I call up when I have a question about business, when I have a question about marketing, when I have a question about emerging audiences. It's been so important to grow this group of really people to help me along the way and help me pivot. So I think having internal people to your job, your work wives, as some would call them, to call up when you're like having an issue is so important. Having other mentors like the EICs I mentioned that I call up, Michelle Lee, who's just in this role, is someone I have on speed dial for if I need things. But also, I would also say you need mentorship from what some would consider below. So, for example, we have a digital cover coming and we want to feature a new hot artist. I don't know what the kids like. Okay. I am not on TikTok, but you go to the assistant level and you say, hey, who do you think is cool? Who do you think is hot? Like, tell me something about the world that I don't know. That's also an important level of mentorship, reverse mentorship. So I think all these things are things that I'm thinking about for as I take on this role and when I think about, this pivot that I'm on.
So Jess, you're saying you're not listening to Lil Nas X, correct?
Oh no, I listen to Lil Nas X. Oh, excuse me, Montero. Yes, I am all over that. I go to the youth, and I'm still young myself, so I don't know why I'm acting like I'm very, very on it in some ways. But when it comes to who's next, sometimes I'm behind on that because I'm too worried about, my credit card bills and, things like that. Like, I have other things going on.
Well, thank you, Jess. I really appreciate it. And you really hit on a piece about your internal network. So I do want to switch gears a bit and talk about how we build our internal networks and how you build your personal brand, right? And so, Asia, you've truly built your internal network. You've taken me under your wing. But throughout your time at Condé Nast, like, how have you built the trust, learning different sectors of the business, and how did that really set you up to pivot into your current role as the director of emerging audiences? And how does that kind of relate back to building your personal brand?
Of course. And Maya, I will say you came with your own set of wings and I just help you spread them out across the building. Okay. And I think that is what is very important as being, I want to take a step back. I'm a Black woman from Washington, D.C. I have a lot to say. So with building my internal network, walking into Condé Nast and figuring out, this is something Sueni tells me all the time, there's one personality, but that personality doesn't need to own and take over every single room. There's a time and a place. But there's also a space for me where I wanted to make sure that who I am and my values resonated in the work that I have to bring to the table, whether that's emerging audiences or connecting with younger leaders that come into the company, always connecting with the people of color who enter into these doors, because we have a separate set of initiatives and I would say challenges that face us in any of these larger conglomerate companies. With that being said, I think it's really important. And when I joined Condé Nast, to understand what are the ERGs, the employee resource groups, the councils, what are some of the camaraderie driven narratives that have been set by the company that I can be a part of. I was fortunate enough to, and I still do, lead the Women's Network employee resource group at Condé Nast, which has connected. And when you think about Condé Nast, we are doing well in the women leadership space. Okay, so there's no lack of us in that area, but understanding, and Jessica spoke about this a little bit, from all the levels, from the support from Pam Drucker-Mann to Tally, who are leaders on our commercial team, to some of the amazing assistants that our team, we all come together, and we used to IRL in the BA test kitchen and have, snacks and understand each other and meet each other and share resources. So when you get back to your desk, not only were you building a relationship, you're also understanding who these women are that you sometimes look up to, look over to, and it breaks the ice a bit. And that is necessary in a space like this that has always been so, stuffy. And I'll say women of color specifically, that peer-to-peer mentorship has always been our thing. We run to our group chats. We ask, girl, I remember Jessica was like, what do I wear on my first day with this? And so he's like, should I wear my hair like this? Like, we're getting really fun in that, but it's also, what salary I'm asking for. I'm up for a promotion. Like, having these really transparent and honesty conversations across the board is how you really build a full, I would say a soundboard and mentorship for yourself that can run and look many different spaces. Another thing I'll say, I really have always wanted to maintain a sharp style and personality and make sure that comes through in my work and in my presentation. And when you're surrounded by so much amazing IP that Condé Nast is responsible for, taking that internal network and expanding it outside your building, and know that, the coolest and brightest people may not even be in these doors just yet. It's also about being open, being completely open and getting feedback from other people, because I think we all touched on this already, but there's so much more ways to grow and you'll be forced into that growth. So your internal network can honestly be that sense of sustainability as you move forward throughout all of these pivots.
Yeah, and it's one of those things too, where you kind of have to have like grace for yourself too, because, we all help each other. But if we aren't gracious with ourselves, it's hard to, be able to succeed and show up as our best selves. You know what I mean? So, in looking, at you all, many women aspire to be in the roles that we are in today. And, from the outside looking in, we all talked about this, but it seems like, you've arrived at the mountaintop, right? So Sueni, as you continue to evolve in your career, like what values really like keep you anchored, that ground you, that motivates you to be able to say, I've made a pivot before, I can do it again, pause, and, know that the industry in some cases is uncertain, but like, how do you motivate yourself to continue to move forward?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think, definitely acknowledging this idea of the mountaintop, which I very much have not arrived at yet. Like I think I'm at like one of the summits, one of the peaks of hopefully like a multi-tiered, like multifaceted, larger mountain. But I do think that to the point of having like knowing that I've done this before and can do it again. I do think it's hallmarks like that and touchstones like that keep things going. I think for me, honestly, like just transparently, like it's a pandemic, like we're speaking to one another from our homes. And I think that like what I definitely think about in terms of like pivots, both personal and professional, and how those have moved me and I've moved within them. I think about like just sometimes when the pivot is personal, and sometimes when the inspiration for the pivot is something like the priorities that I had at this leg of the journey are now different. And so now that my priorities are different, how I am looking at this industry and my role in it is different. Ergo, like the pivot is one in which where I am like moving further into alignment with my personal values where they are at that point in time. And so I do think, and I know that Jess called this out when she mentioned like taking some time for herself before she jumped into this new, very large role, like also always making sure that the constant, consistent checking back in and checking in with your peer mentors, checking in with your support system, making sure that you are bolstering yourself for each and every leg of the journey as you're on it. And I even think that at each leg, to the point of quarterly check-ins, you ask yourself if the idea of success or mountaintops or, like peaks that you had on the last leg, if that's still the case. I think that the industry that we're in is changing so much. Not even the last 10 years, the last 5 years, we're talking about just like the way consumer, audience, video, social, all of these platforms and mediums have changed the way that we do the storytelling that our company is so well known for. And so I think that like some of those shifts industry-wide are also personal ones. And sometimes for me, the thing that is driving me isn't actually what's happening in the market, isn't actually what's happening with our competitors, isn't actually me trying to close that next deal for us. Sometimes it's my family needs me. Sometimes it's my friends need me. Sometimes it's I actually feel like the way that we're working now is no longer in alignment with the way that I'm feeling as a Black woman, a human being, a woman from Brooklyn, the oldest of 7 children, like from an immigrant household who's like trying to do things in alignment with who I am at my core, no matter what role I'm in or what company it's at. And so I think for me, when I think about like what's shaping these things and what sort of have been the necessary elements, it's just constantly checking in and always making sure that like the syncs are there and that what I'm doing from the 9 to 5 feels just as strong and prevalent as what I'm doing in every other hour.
And I love that too, the always checking in, and, we can't pour from an empty cup. And we have to continue to remind ourselves that, as Black women. And I know we're at time, but would love just in a quick 30 seconds, any advice, resource that you would want to leave with the audience. Jess, if you want to kick us off.
I would just say, kind of similar to what Sueni is saying, have your crew that checks in on you mentally and emotionally. Because, part of taking a big job is my friend saying, but are you going to like go crazy though? Like, is it going to actually be bad for your mental health to be editor-in-chief of Allure? And that was a conversation that we had to have. And, we get so blinded by, it's going to be so glamorous. I'm so excited by this opportunity. But sometimes you have to step back and say, is this going to have me like shaking in the corner, like completely not sleeping, like messed up? And when you can't see that for yourself, sometimes it's, important to have your friends be like, love you, want this for you, but let's talk about the realities of what could happen. So I think really, as Sueni mentioned, my mental health has been so important, and having a mental health squad of people who are always checking on me in that way, and figuring out how to cope with like working out and eating and learning how to not make compromises on that, right? About saying, yes, I'll do meetings all day, but from 12 to 1, I have a lunch break. And, you know, during that hour, I'm going to make myself a salad and eat. You know, that's important to me.
Yes, we have to remember to eat, everybody. Asia, what about you? Any resources or quick bits of advice?
Yeah, and I get this question a lot because I'm out in the streets, I'm dancing, I'm at work, I'm doing my thing. They're like, how do you do it all? I mean, honestly, my new jam is we love lists, but I make a list that it's only 3 things and for the day, and it's no more than that. I can do but so many things in one day, and putting those unrealistic expectations, and when you cross a few things off, you still see 5 more. My advice would to be start condensing your list of things to do. What are the priorities? And so you mentioned that about 5 times. We've all said narrowing down on priorities, values, checking in on yourself, very important. But to get more granular on a day-to-day basis, what are the 3 things that you need to get done today that when you go to sleep, you feel accomplished? Because it's very important that you align and feel that, we're working through things. Enjoy it. We're accomplishing great things all day. If you feel accomplished after you send one email at 9 a.m., that may be your one thing, and live in that, because some days are bigger than others. But I'm saying start really condensing that down, because we have a long road, no matter what part of your path is on. I think that would be my one piece of advice.
That's amazing, because for me, the win most often is just that one email that I get.
You do one thing and you're like, I'm done for the day.
Yes, especially on Fridays. Woo.
Very true. I think for me, on the like advice sort of touchstone note, I think I think a lot about what Nicole Hannah-Jones at the New York Times did when she was up for tenure at UNC, and then ultimately decided, after a very protracted tenure battle that became very public, she ultimately decided, like, you know what, I don't actually have to be here. I don't actually have to, like, my purpose supersedes this one institution's potential investment in me and what that is. And so I think something that I sort of hold on to as I think about that story, because I think about it a lot, is that, ultimately the way and how tightly we clutch these roles at places that we don't own, in which like our responsibilities are dictated in part by people who are not us. I think something that I think about a lot and grounds me and reminds me is that, there is always, my purpose is larger. My purpose as a person is larger than the purpose I have within the walls and halls of Condé Nast. And if at any time I feel like I have outgrown, or it no longer feels like my purpose is in lockstep with the purpose I have in the role, then there is always something else that is going to meet me where I am and make me feel just as valued, to the earlier point of value, as I still continue to feel here right now. So I definitely think about Nicole Hannah-Jones a lot, and just think about like, what's for me is for me, and if it's not here, it will always be somewhere. There'll always be somewhere else.
Absolutely. And if it's meant to be, it will continue to be, right? Well, ladies, like I said, we always talk, but it's good to talk to you all in this type of setting. And I just want to thank the Sisters in Sales team for giving us this platform. And just a shout out to our company for allowing us to hold this space and talk about our experiences. If you have any questions, just feel free to connect with all of us on LinkedIn. We hope you have an amazing weekend.